Welcome into Cornhusker Connection. I'm Brandon Shanahan. Real quick before the show starts, just wanted to give some transparency into the process. We talk a little bit about conference realignments in this episode. And to be transparent, we recorded this episode before the news that Colorado was going to the Big 12. So take that with a grain of salt while listening to the episode. Still lots of great stuff. Brooke Byrne now, in addition to me and Tyler Sprinkel from our Entering the Transfer Portal podcast from last season. Cornhusker Connection up now. Go Big Red. Welcome in a new edition of the podcast. Brandon Shanahan here with Tyler Sprinkel and a new friend with us today, Brooke Byrne. Brooke and I go way back. We've been friends for probably one of my oldest friends. We're distantly related. I also was thinking about it today. I'm also pretty sure that you were the person I was with when I found out Osama bin Laden had been killed. So that gives, I think we were at Funplex. I don't know how I found out about it. It's a different age, but that gives you any idea on how far we go back. But so last year, Tyler and I were in the transfer portal, and we're back, and we're talking college football. A little bit of a Husker slant since we're back on the bandwagon. And Brooke, let me just ask you this to get you started. What was your experience like as a Husker fan last year? Were you jumping ship, or were you just like riding out the storm?
I mean, I'd say a little bit of both. It was so disheartening with all that went on. I still, I'll remain loyal forever, like watching all the games and whatnot. But I think I was checked out after the Georgia Southern loss. And I mean, it's just, like Brandon, your dad talking about it and like what the Huskers were in like the 90s and like our entire adult life almost, that like they've just been so bad is just tough for us. But
yeah, and there was the whole stretch where they were good in it, not great, but just good. But it's just, and then just the last few years were just falling off, and like they're genuinely a bad football team. It's insane. Because I remember last year, like the whole process was, going into the season, I was so excited. I'm trying to find this text message here, but shoot, hold on. Because I remember being so excited going through that 3-9 season the year before, just watching them get so close, like playing against these really good teams and just not being able to finish it out. I saw a highlight. Somebody put together a highlight reel on Twitter of that season the other day.
I did. They called it the best 3-9 football team ever, and I was like, that's insane.
And I was going through that. I was like, first of all, how hard is it to find a fucking person who can kick a football? Like,
Jesus.
in any way, shape, or form. I'm like, we win 4 games if we have somebody who can competently kick a football. But here's a text message going into this season, like right before the Northwestern game that I sent. Like, the game's about to start. I have goosebumps. I'm so excited. It sucks that Nebraska hasn't been very good lately, but holy moly, there's no better feeling than this one right here, right before the game's about to start. Man, I only know they won 3 games last year. Nobody believes me, but I think Nebraska's going to be so good this year. And then they go and lose to Northwestern in the most Nebraska fashion. Double-digit lead going into halftime, the weird onside kick. And then as soon as they lost that game, I'm like, oh, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. It's the same shit that last year was. Whether Nebraska's good or not, it doesn't matter. They're just going to find ways to comically lose these games. And then they're going to fire Scott Frost, and then they're just going to bring in some other mediocre coach. Because when Scott Frost was hired, I was so excited because he was like the up-and-coming coach. He had the coaching pedigree with working with Chip Kelly, developing Marcus Mariota, winning that Heisman. And then the 12-0 or 13-0 season with Central Florida. I was like, he's the up-and-coming guy. And of that coaching cycle, maybe not as prominent as Chip Kelly, but right there with him as far as like interest. And he came to Nebraska only because he played for Nebraska. And like moving forward, we're never going to be able to get that kind of caliber coach, because if Scott Frost doesn't work out, it's going to be a disaster. And so that's what I was expecting. So I was like, all right, well, I'm checking out. We're right back where we started. And we explored pretty much, it feels like 24 teams at least. At one point, I had the entire state of Florida on my list.
I
Tyler
wasn't having
just
any of that shit though.
he reprimanded me every step of the way. But so then let me pick your brain on this, Brooke. If you were to have left the college or entered the college football fan transfer portal, what would your top 5 look like?
Oh man, dude, you guys are throwing me a curveball right away. I mean, obviously, like Brandon, like growing up, like as a Nebraska fan, there's like certain teams that you have to hate: Oklahoma, Texas, Notre Dame, Florida. Like those schools that were all good in the '90s.
Those
It's
teams were
hard.
basically that was my whole list minus Texas, pretty much.
Yeah, I was like, some of them were like fun to watch though, like truly. Um, Tennessee was an interesting one, even though again that's like not one it's okay to say you kind of like liked as a Nebraska fan, but Washington was interesting to me with Penix for sure. I love watching them. And then, man, I'm really drawing a blank, dude.
You see, in the trouble with where you guys are at in Nebraska, and something I factored in pretty heavily last year is like if I wanted to go to a game with a lot of those teams that you mentioned, like Tennessee, like Washington, any of the teams on the coast, like I had both the Southern California teams at one point. I'm like, I got to get on a plane and I got
Yeah.
to go
Oh,
thousands of miles.
I got
And
my top 2 for you here, real quick. So it would have been down to Wake Forest with me with Hartman. Also, Lance Leipold, what he did at Kansas, and the Jalen Daniel, or is it Jaden or Jalen Daniels?
Jalen, I think, or Mr.
Whatever
Daniels.
it is, they were fun to watch. And
They were on
Kansas
my
is always
list.
so bad; they're easy to root for.
Yeah,
Yep.
they were on Tyler's list for an episode, and I reprimanded him pretty hard for it.
Yeah, and then after I was like the kiss of death last year. Every time I was like, "Oh, dude, this team looks fucking sweet," and then they would lose like 4 in a row. All right, well,
I mean, Oregon was going to go to the playoff before Tyler had him on his list.
yep,
Jesus.
yep. Then when
Well,
Oklahoma
I mean,
State, it was just bad.
hitching your wagon to Bo Nix usually isn't good. So, I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, they were cruising for a while, but yeah, it's just it. And like my process really kind of got interesting with TCU because they're just 45 minutes from where I'm at now. Then of course they go on this magical run. And I remember it boiling down to one moment because they got to go to the Big 12 championship game. They play Kansas State again, conference championship, playoff spot on the line. They lose in overtime. By the way, Miller was in the end zone, but nonetheless. And I
that
remember
was
walking home out of that AT&T stadium. I was sad. I was like, "This is my team." I had my TCU hat. I bought a T-shirt, got a souvenir cup. I'm like, "This is sad." But if this was Nebraska, it'd feel so much
oh,
more emotion, so much worse. And like that's what I was looking for. And the whole process was what teams make me feel something, because that's something that's I don't know. I feel like with NFL, like you kind of just pick your team and it is what it is because there's not a whole lot of difference between being like a New England fan versus like a Green Bay fan as far as the experiences, the environments, and all that. So it feels a lot more even. So I'm like, what college football team can make me feel something? And TCU came close. Colorado's also on that list with Coach Prime, but I'm like going forward, like there's just no place like Nebraska as far as like where I want to hitch my wagon to.
it's so weird. Like, if you're not from here to like fully understand it, and like, you know, as a 26-year-old adult, like when I go to games still and like listening to the tunnel walk and like it genuinely almost makes me want to cry every time. Whether it's like Georgia Southern or it's Ohio State we're playing against, like it's just like it always sucks you back in, especially like when you're down there and like in that atmosphere. To me there's nothing cooler.
Yeah, there's truly nothing like it, and I've been fortunate enough to go see a lot of college football games over the last couple of years in a lot of stadiums, and yeah, just like you said it, like there's just nothing like it. Like I went to both the Iowa schools, Oklahoma State for Bedlam, the Rose Bowl. It's such a unique place where you pack in 90,000 fucking psychopaths
Oh yeah.
who are all on the same page. And yeah, the way that they produce the tunnel walk and all the other like production things. It's just insane, and it's hard to really hitch your wagon to anywhere else with that kind of investment.
And especially since they've been so bad and they still can produce that, like you got something special there.
And so we'll get to know Brooke here a little bit, talk about some issues here in college football and how it's changed, because it's even changed quite a bit since we left off our last edition in the winter. But since you bring up the sellout, let me put something out there. It was on the list here, but I was curious. I see a lot of people on the internet trashing Nebraska for their fraudulent sellout streak because boosters have been known to buy a bunch of tickets and give them away.
I've been seeing that too. It's crazy.
Is there any weight to that?
I truly don't think so. Just because, like, I don't know the exact number. Like, boosters are splitting up to like get to that sellout number. But like, I've been to some of those games where they're like, oh, it's not that full. And like, I will say, like, with the more like losing seasons we've had, it's like people aren't in their seats right at kickoff anymore like they used to be. So like people are still filing in well into the first quarter and sometimes even in the second quarter. But I mean, when I'm there, it still feels pretty fucking packed. So I mean, they can, tisk at it all they want, but I still think it's a sellout. But
well, and I crunched some numbers. Like, let's say they're buying 30,000 tickets. They're not. That's a ridiculous number for anybody to just buy 30,000. So that's still 60,000 people coming to every game. That's more than a lot of Power 5 schools have on a regular basis.
I promise you, it's always over 80. Like,
yeah,
with people in there. Like, it's
you
never.
Also got to think, like, they don't serve booze there. So, a lot of the kids, a lot of the, like people like us would be still boozing before the games. So maybe they're not there right at kickoff, but.
Yeah. But then, you hit the point on the head. The stadium's still full. Like, it's not like they're really just peppering tickets and holding up this. And even if they were, like, even if it was this weird situation where they're buying 30,000 tickets, again, they're not. And even if it was a situation where they're not completely full, it is. That's false. That's still 60 years of sellouts. Like, all of a sudden that. Like, are you going to discredit that just because of these people buying tickets in bulk?
I don't think so. If anything, to me, like, 2 points about that, like, it shows how much, like, some of the boosters care enough to, like, buy. I mean, if it was truly that high of a number, like, that's a lot of money to shell out just to keep some, like, streak alive like that. And two, like, again, like, if they are buying tickets in bulk, like, it's not anything more than like 500 to 1,000, which is like, when you consider all the bodies in the suites and the people still filing in, like, I mean, I truly don't think there's anything there with like the fraudulent sellout streak.
It's one of my biggest pet peeves. But on to the next topic. They also recently expanded the playoff to 12 teams, including the 6 best conference champions. Brooke, did they get it right?
Absolutely. I think we've been moving toward this for a while, but like, there truly will be no doubt. Like, I think when it's all said and done, like, it's going to be, if you think you're one of those top, 12 teams, you have a chance to go out there and earn it. So it's like, we could even see, like, it'll be super weird. Like, for example, like this year with like Kansas State, like a team with like 3 losses, like getting in there, potentially 4. I don't know. Like, with how good the SEC is, like, it's hard to see Bama not being in it every year for like the next however long Nick Saban coaches. But I mean, it really will be like, if you think you're good, you have the chance to go prove it. So
I think the number one objection I hear to it is that it's going to discount the regular season. Do you think that that's a big deal?
No, because I mean, you still, like, those regular season games still matter. Like, you still have to take care of business. Like, regardless of like how many teams are in the playoff, or even just like when we were in the BCS era, which was way tougher to, because you had to look up and down the standings to see what other teams were doing. But I mean, regardless, you still have to take care of business and win football games and prove it at the end of the day. So,
and that's why I think they got it exactly right with the automatic conference champions. And it's going to be a little bit weird since and we'll talk about a little bit about this later, but I don't think there's going to be 5 power conferences going forward. And now that there's the 6 best conference champions, I think that'll look a bit weird. But overall, it might discount some of the games for a little bit because now you're not going to have a perfect season. But what it's also going to do is it's going to add so much value to the conference championship games. Because I was just thinking about the most recent slate of conference championship games. Georgia was going to get in regardless, so that game didn't matter. Michigan was going to get in regardless. That didn't matter. TCU lost, and they still got in, so that game didn't matter. The Pac-12 game mattered, I guess, since USC lost and they missed out. But now just looking at the consequences of that, like Kansas State, now not only do they get a Big 12 championship trophy, but they also get an opportunity to compete for the playoffs. And in that same regard, TCU, since they didn't take care of business, they go from having a home game in that first round to probably going on the road.
and that's what I was just thinking now. Like, I still think that'll matter because at the end of the day, you're still playing to like win your conference, one, and two, like at that point, like you have to think about people are still going to want to play well in those conference championship games because you have to think about your route now. Because if you lose and then you end up having to like play a Bama round 1 or 2 instead of just taking care of business and winning, and then you get like a 2 or a 3 loss team who's not as strong. So like I feel like you'll definitely have to look at your route still, and like if we do see teams like kind of coasting because they know they're in, like I mean they're gonna get tougher draws. So
Absolutely, and I mean, you got to have incentives on all level because obviously you got to have incentives when you expand it out. Now there are teams on the fringe who are out getting an opportunity to compete for it and try to finish out their season on a win and try to pull off upsets in the conference championship games. And then you also have incentives at the top because, if I'm Georgia, I know I'm going to get into the playoff if I beat LSU in this championship game. But if I win, we get a whole game off. We get a bye,
exactly.
or if we lose, then we have to all of a sudden go on the road and beat one of these top 10 teams. And for a team like Georgia, it might not matter as much, but it does matter. It does play a big deal. There is that incentive still.
Yeah, if you say like Georgia's starting quarterback goes out and gets hurt in the round that they had to play instead of having a bye, like that would change everything for them. But
And he was 74 years old, so that is a very real concern
yeah,
for Georgia.
brittle bones.
Ridiculous. And so swinging it back to Nebraska here. So throughout the process of hiring Matt Rule, I think at the beginning, Tyler and I were pretty skeptical once his name started to get thrown out. Think back to right when the Scott Frost news dropped and possible names were thrown out. Who was on your radar and who did you want as the next head coach?
So, I mean, for me, after what Lance Leipold did at Kansas, I thought, and like his connections to Nebraska, like being a former assistant, I thought that would have been a slam dunk. But I mean, I think they did a good job in hiring Rule. A lot more has come out. Like I just wasn't a fan of hiring a guy who failed so bad, like literally less than a year ago. And thinking back, there are a lot of college coaches who have not done well at the NFL level and are still great college coaches. Nick Saban being one of them. So I think like with what Rule has done, like has changed so many minds, and like mine being one of them, because I was not thrilled at that hire at first, but I think Trev Alberts did an awesome job. It's puts me at ease a lot more than, this whole Frost situation.
Another one of the turning points for me in that process last year of who am I going to root for going forward, and when Nebraska was starting to kind of get back into the mix with TCU, and once Coach Prime rumors got thrown out, Colorado was in there, but was the more I thought about Trev Alberts, because I thought like his whole life has been leading up to this role as the athletic director at Nebraska, from being a top 50 all-time Husker player to being a successful AD at UNO, just right down the highway there. Then now finally, of course, it always felt like he was kind of getting groomed for this role. And I think anybody will tell you confidently, the biggest part of this role, you can get so much else wrong. By the way, he hasn't gotten anything else wrong, but
Nope.
you could get a lot wrong if you get the head football coach right. It can't quite go both ways. But the more I thought about that, I'm like, there's probably 8 billion people on Earth. I don't think there's any one single person better built for this job than Trev Alberts.
No.
So yeah, it kind of came down to whoever Trev Alberts thinks is going to be the next guy. Then Trev we trust. He's not going to get this wrong.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there, because Trev Alberts is just like the perfect guy for this job. Played at Nebraska, was a stud there. If like people outside of Nebraska don't know what he did at UNO, like you really need to look into that, because taking them to D1 was just like, I don't know, made that university flourish. And like,
And that wasn't a no-brainer, by the way. Like, it sounds like,
no,
oh, well, you're going from
people
NAIA
in
to
Omaha were
D1.
upset about that,
Yeah.
because they had a very good D2, like a national brand D2 wrestling program and a solid football program. And like, it was not popular right away, but like looking back on it, it was the right move and, the best thing for that university. So, I mean, I don't think he's made a bad move yet. And, which Lincoln, Nebraska, they've messed up with their hirings of ADs in the past, like Eichhorst and Moose, looked good to start, but didn't finish great. So,
Yeah, and he's one of those examples of, well, you thought he got the head coaching stuff right, but then so some of the other financials he kind of let slip and wasn't too great on that. And if Scott Frost works out, then he gets right off into the sunset as a
and
well-respected GM or AD, but not the
and
case.
like you said, Scott Frost was such a hot name in like the coaching carousel. I don't think there's anybody in the country who thought that was a bad hire. Like that was a slam dunk, hometown kid, hottest name on the market. Like you make that move 100 times out of 100 if you're Nebraska, and he had personal issues and some demons that no one knew about because he was winning at UCF so regularly. But I mean, it just like all of his sins, started showing up when he got to Nebraska. So,
And I think looking at Matt Rule compared to some of the other names that Tyler and I were throwing out, like Luke Fickell, for example, like really great coach.
That's another one I really
Yeah.
wanted, but
But
sucks.
the more I think about it, the more I'm excited about Matt Rule because of what he's been able to do. He's not just a great football coach. Like I think on the coaching level, I think I would have rather have Fickell. And frankly, I think Scott Frost is a good coach too. Like I think he has a great resume as well. And I think if whenever he does come back to coaching, he'll be just fine. But the job is not just that. And when Scott Frost got here, it needed some work, and now it still needs some work as far as rebuilding and resetting the culture. And I don't think that ever really, like, that dirty work never really got done with Scott Frost. That he never
No.
really hit the reset button, cleaned house on the culture, and really built it up in a way where, the talent that they had and even the coaching wasn't awful, but like they were set up to win. But I think a lot, yeah, looking at that 3-9 season, like they were competing with all these great teams, but they weren't winning. So the only thing I can attribute to that is not having the winning culture. But I think Matt Rule is the perfect guy to really establish that.
It just makes you wonder about that 3-9 team. Like, Imagine if they had a coach like Sonny Dykes or a coach who was good in those one-score situations, because it seemed like TCU was on the right end of a lot of those. It's like, how good was that team? Like maybe we just don't know. Like, like you said, they just had that losing culture, and if they just had the right like guy in that spot, would they have been like a 9, 10, 11 win team? Because like they played even with Ohio State for 3.5 quarters, and a lot of other teams. Michigan had them on the ropes.
Had a lead in the fourth quarter against Michigan.
Exactly.
They held Michigan State to 2 first downs in the second half.
That
They
season
were
will be
insane.
talked about for years and decades to come, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think, when I look back on the Scott Frost era, like it never really got off the ground. Even from the very get-go, that first game gets postponed. And then you go to Folsom Field the next week and lose a tough one. And it just never felt like they got their feet underneath them. And, you kind of always expect them to, but you're right. Just a very, very little things. And it's interesting to think about if they had just gone differently, how everything would look so different now.
Oh,
Because a 10-win season in that 3-9 season that we're talking about, that's not obscene. If they have a
no.
kicker and a punt and they can cover punts and get punts off and don't have them blocked, yeah, they at least go to a bowl game, at least win 7-8 games, probably make it to the Big Ten championship in that division. And then, yeah, of course, Scott Frost doesn't get fired.
Yes. You think even if he just goes 6-6 in that 1 year, he probably finishes out that last year, I think. Like, people literally just wanted a bowl game so bad and wanted to see progress, and like it just never happened. And you saw the boosters ponied up that extra, you know, I don't know the exact number, remember what I heard, but
It was pretty
to,
significant.
to get him out before October 1st because he had that clause, like people were just so sick of it. Like, and it goes to show you, like, those boosters will dive deep into their pockets, like if they are frustrated. So,
Tyler, do you have any fond memories of the Scott Frost era?
Well, back to what Brooke was just saying, like if he goes 6-6 and just gets to a bowl game the year prior, like I don't know with the stuff that we know now, it's hard to say that because like there's some bad stuff that's come out.
Yeah.
But also if it doesn't happen the way it does, maybe they keep that in house and don't tell anybody about that kind of stuff. So it's hard to say. I'll never forget like when the announcement first came through and they're like, "Oh, we got Scott Frost." Like, dude,
I mean,
that was so exciting, and it was just like now, all the world is our oyster. We could do anything, nothing but going up.
Yeah, we're back.
Yeah, unfortunately, not the case, and unfortunately, we're talking about it the same again.
I remember my dad
I
was
really
so
do.
excited that I looked to my mom like, "Have you ever seen him this happy before?" She's like, he wasn't this excited when you were born."
Yeah, I mean, I like Brooke said too. Like 100 out of 100 times you make that hire. I mean, there was nobody else was going to take that job but Scott Frost, and it was up to him to turn us down. And obviously he didn't, and it was very exciting. But back to the Matt Rule stuff. Like, I'm sure we might get into this a little later, like a little closer to the season, but just already the things that he's doing, just making it a point to get the great athletes that we have in Nebraska to Nebraska, something that we haven't done in a long time, I think is already a step in the right direction. Getting the love back for Nebraska, because a lot of these guys, one, they're not being recruited by Nebraska too often, and when they are, they push their nose up at it because they know like what's been going on there the last couple of years. So I think this is just we're in a great spot right now, and I'm excited. Just unfortunately, things did not go the way that we thought they were going to go with Scott Frost. So hopefully, we have a big boy now, like an adult that can actually run a football team instead of somebody that wants to hang out with their frat bros all the time.
man, dude. And like touching on that, like I don't think any of that stuff would have ever been able to like been totally kept under wraps that he was doing, just because Nebraska is like even the whole state, it's like a small town feel where like that stuff, but like if he was winning, I really don't think people would have cared as much. But like when you're losing and doing the wrong things like that, like off the field, like that just makes it that much worse. Like,
Yep. I mean, they did a great job keeping it under wraps for as long as they did. So I think you're right on that.
For sure. And you look back to some of those things with like Lawrence Phillips, like they don't care if you're winning ball games. And not saying that Scott Frost was doing anything like what Lawrence Phillips was doing, but yeah, I think if he was winning football games,
I was gonna say there were a lot of like rumors that were flying around in the 90s within that Nebraska football program, and like even to this day, like nobody really truly cares because they won so much. It's like winning really cures all in this state, and I mean you see that firsthand with Frost. You don't win and you get the boot.
Well, and you can see it with like athletes themselves, right? Like if you're an issue and you stink, you're gone. But if you're an issue and you're really good, then a lot people have a higher tolerance for you. So
True.
How funny would it be if Scott Frost goes to Northwestern?
That would be hilarious. I mean,
dude, I heard Ed Ogeron, bro.
Yeah, that would be a good hire for them.
Oh, let's go.
I mean, that's such a disaster. I don't know who you get to clean that up.
What do you guys make of like that whole rumor now about that Northwestern situation where they think it's a disgruntled ex-player like embellishing these like claims that he's making?
Well, I don't want to victim shame, right? Because
I just
for all
want
we
to know
everything. Yeah, for all we know, everything he said was true, right?
Yeah.
But it does make you think, right? Like anytime somebody gets pissed off.
My whole thing in these situations, I want to know the truth. I really don't care who's right and who's wrong. Like it just I mean, Pat Fitzgerald has had just a crazy good reputation for the better part of a decade. And like, it's never say never, but it just definitely feels weird to me. I don't know how to feel about it, but
well, he was one of those coaches too that was getting a lot of traction in like coaching hires and stuff. Like I don't know if he ever would have left Northwestern because that just doesn't seem like the guy he was or
he
is.
He was a lifer. I mean, think about it. They won one game last year and he got to keep his job. Like I truly think he would have been a lifer there.
Oh, who did they beat last year?
Yeah, boy, what a shitty team. I wonder who that one win was.
Like
that pisses me off so much.
Think about like how bad that loss looks now, week 1. You lost to the worst Power 5 team in the country after being up double digits late in the game. Like
dude, I mean they Sean Payton us. What do you want to say?
I mean, it's insane. I can't believe that game. Especially looking back, like,
and I mean
that was an awful football team that we lost to.
And like looking back at, I'm drawing a blank. Who was our DC to start the year last year?
Oh, that's a good question.
Why can I not remember?
Oh, fuck, Shanahan.
Oh my God! Like think about, like he should have been fired on the spot for what that Northwestern quarterback did to us that game. That man, was like 30 of 33 for like 350 yards and like 4 touchdowns. And then he ended up like losing his job like 4 weeks later. Like what?
After the game, I felt some solace. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, that kid's obviously going to win the Heisman Trophy, so it's a bummer that he torched us like that. But I mean, he is going to be the number 1 overall pick. So,
not to make that kid feel bad or anything, but like he was not that good, and we made him look like a Heisman frontrunner that week.
Insane.
A lot of my favorite teams are good at that, making people that have no business looking good.
Yeah, we got really used to that during football season these last few years.
Ugh.
And so, moving on to my last point. So, a lot's going on with conference realignment. Latest update with this being the last year with Oklahoma and Texas in the Big 12, USC and UCLA coming to the Big 10, which I also think is just objectively hilarious. First of all, what is college football going to look like next? Are we done, or do we have more moves, and what are those moves?
Well, they've already started getting rid of like conferences, right? Like within the divisions within the conferences.
Yeah.
Right? which
Which
I don't
I
really
think
know
is
what's going to change too much about that, but that'd be
yeah.
cool.
It keeps teams like this last Purdue team out of the Big Ten championship.
Yeah.
That's true.
They had no business being in that game, but they were good enough. So good for them.
So my theory is that I don't think the Pac-12 is sustainable as it is. And I saw a tweet today that they're going to start showing ACC games on the CW, which is hilarious because
That's
you
sick,
think,
dude.
you think
That's disgusting.
it's insane. And Florida and Clemson are pissed off at the revenue sharing because they're not getting as much money as teams in the Big Ten and the SEC, and they're grossly underpaid, which they are comparatively, and yet they're
Well,
still making more than every Pac-12 team.
they're in a shitty conference. I mean, what do you want?
Well, I'm just saying, like, it's bad.
I'm gonna bite my tongue
Yeah.
here because I'm gonna say something real bad. But
Say
I mean,
it.
you don't bring the product. You don't bring the product like for the full conference, like top
Yeah.
to bottom. The Big Ten is solid, right? Like, yeah, obviously you have like the Rutgers in there and the Nebraskas of years past that aren't as good, but you still have like national champion teams year in and year out. And yeah, you can say, oh, Florida State and Clemson, but who else do you have? I mean, North Carolina's good every once in a while. I mean,
top to bottom, like you said, that conference is very top heavy. So like the bottom 6 or 7 teams just really aren't carrying their weight. And that'll be interesting to see if anything happens with that, because I could see the Pac-12 like disbanding, and you could also see like the ACC is either going to sink or swim. They might, add some teams to get like more firepower. Maybe Notre Dame finally hops on like all the way in, or I don't know. Like they could just as easily, like I could see Clemson and Florida State like leaving, so and making them not a Power 5 conference.
well, I heard somebody say it the other day. I can't remember who was talking about it, but not for football. I think it was in like another interview I was listening to. Not only for football, but for like basketball and like volleyball and baseball and stuff. Could you imagine how much those teams are gonna have to travel? Like the UCLA and USC teams.
Think
Oh my
about
gosh.
like I was thinking about this. So think about a Sunday night matchup in the middle of like early December where college students are going through finals. Could you imagine UCLA flying to Maryland and then having to go back to UCLA in the middle of like finals? That's
Or
absolutely nuts.
even the opposite. Maryland goes to SoCal. Like that would be
Yeah.
crazy. And I don't know the way like how that all works with the academics and stuff. Obviously, they're students first, right? But I'm sure that a lot of them like take like a lot of summer classes, so I'm sure that's not too big of an issue. But I get exactly what you're saying. And even students that are like traveling to these games, which I don't think, at least right away, is going to be a lot of them because that's a lot to travel. But that's a thing that hits most in my mind, like
Well,
just
like,
the traveling.
yeah,
Teams
because Maryland and Rutgers are like the fun examples and going all the way to Penn State. But outside of like those two Southern California schools, the closest school is Nebraska, which is still halfway across the country.
Yeah,
so 2 time zones away.
Yeah.
And so that's
funny. And I
funny.
think the logic there is the money's going to make up for how much they're traveling. So maybe there's
kids,
something.
Like the kids, like that's what they always preach. Oh, the kids are the most important, the best product in the world, kids. But I don't know.
Well, and you bring up like, so some of the student athletes probably don't take their academics very seriously, but it's not just them. It's the training staff and the equipment students and all those people who very much do care about their classes and having to ship them on. Because I don't think they can ship all your equipment on a plane. I think you always have to drive that, don't you?
Oh, shit.
Oh, man, I forgot about that. Well, maybe they're going to have to start
2 days across the country.
Maybe they're going to have to like start flying then, because like there's no like how long do you think it would take like a semi truck full of equipment to get from SoCal to like Piscataway, New Jersey? Like that would be
like
there's no way.
hours, I bet. Here, let's see. Let me look.
Oh my God.
There's no way.
There's no way they're going to be able to drive that anymore. That's insane.
So then, as far as the Pac-12, because I think they're the most vulnerable. Because I don't think, as much as we just trash on the ACC, which is all very valid, they are not a very good football conference. They've lost a lot of their firepower basketball wise with Coach K leaving and all that. But I still think they have way more value than the Pac-12 minus USC and UCLA. Not to mention they're already back down to 10 teams now with them losing the SoCal schools. So I think they're ready for to. I think they'd be the easiest cookie jar to steal from. And so best case scenario for me would be the four corner schools going to the Big 12: Colorado, Utah, Arizona State. Then the Big 12, the Big 10's got to pick up some of those teams just to kind of negate some of those travel logistics that we just mentioned. Oregon and Washington being out there because they don't really they can't go to like the ACC. That's way worse.
I'm wondering if we could possibly start seeing like mergers where like maybe two conferences, like what if the Mountain West and like the Pac-12 like merged and created like a super conference, and you start getting like maybe there won't be as many conferences anymore. Like maybe you just have like 6, 7, or 8 like just giant conferences now where it's, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but I mean, we're definitely in for some fireworks with as far as realignment goes.
And another theory that I've thrown out that I don't think will ever happen, but I think would solve a lot of the problems is like a relegation system. So where if you were to take like the Big 12 and the Pac-12 and kind of merge them together and have separate tiers, I think that would add a lot of value. Not only do you get the best of those teams playing each other every year, but you also get the additional eyeballs on the lesser teams who are now trying to work their way up into that higher revenue tier. So that's, to me, that would be kind of best case scenario. Maybe not for Nebraska so much right now.
Yeah,
but
that would suck for us.
For overall college football, I think that's kind of the scenario where you kind of take all these conferences.
Dude, I'm getting a headache just like talking about like, could you imagine like being like those universities and like conference heads like trying to figure this out? Like, I mean,
it takes 41 hours, by the way.
41. That's
the drive from USC to Rutgers, 41 hours.
And like you got to add on a bunch of hours just because that's not
stuff. That's like a whole
all those
couple days trip. But it does take 907 hours to walk. So maybe they'll.
Oh yeah, maybe they'll just make just strap up all the equipment folks with the equipment.
Or do they start like buying trains?
They could.
Because
what if college football is the thing that brings back the American railroad system?
It takes 3 days to get there from USC to Rutgers by train.
That's not a bad deal.
But you can run that all like 24 hours a day, as far as I'm concerned, right?
For sure.
Yeah, trains get slept on, that's for sure.
No, you sleep on trains.
That's fair. Especially taking the Amtrak to Denver. You get on at like 10:30 at night, wake up at 6 in the morning.
Wait.
Yeah.
We gotta talk about that.
It also goes back to Chicago too. So if looking to go to the Northwestern game
for my bachelor party, just take the Amtrak.
Let's do it.
I'm so down for that because I do not want to drive.
So. I don't either. I was looking at this. Sorry, we'll talk about this later.
Quick side note there, in case they're interested.
But that's all I had for today. Just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on where college football is, where the status of Husker football is, and kind of what the future holds. We'll get into more about the Matt Rule success so far with recruiting here later, and then also start talking about what to expect this fall.